Many of you know, some of you don't know, that I'm a graduate of Cal Farley's Boys Ranch. My wife's mother worked almost her entire adult life at Boys Ranch and retired from there. We have several others in our church, or a few that have ties to Boys Ranch as well. And I just felt led to share this morning. And no, not that one. The one that says I want them to know. Anyway, if it doesn't come up, that's the one. Just leave that if you don't mind. And so, yesterday was the 55th anniversary of Cal Farley's death. Probably doesn't mean anything to any of you except my wife and I, and then a few people in the first service. But I want to share with you why it's important to me, and I think you'll understand. He was born in 1895 and died February 19th, 1967. And my father worked for this man, and after he died, he continued the legacy for a total of 42 years is how my mom and dad worked out there. And so I want to read what was written in what's called the Ranch Roundup. It's a monthly thing that goes out to supporters and other people. And this was from March 1967, so bear with me. As he had done so many times, Mr. Farley was standing on the steps of the non-sectarian chapel with the ranchers, shaking their hands, giving them his friendly "how you doing?" The 11 o'clock morning worship services were about to begin, a special service conducted by the boys in vocational agriculture. The ranch founder wanted to be with them. With a few minutes to go, he walked into the chapel. Mr. and Mrs. Levon Adams of the ranch staff moved over to make space for him on a back pew. With them was their 1-year-old son, Benji, and Mr. Farley took a little time to play with him. Sitting in a pew in front of him was 15-year-old Gary Pierce from Whittier, California. Mr. Farley leaned over and spoke to Gary, the last boy ever to hear his voice. As he waited for the service to begin, the ranch founder reached inside his coat pocket and brought out paper and pen. He began writing. Suddenly, Mr. Adams felt pressure on his arm. He whispered to his wife, "Mr. Farley's asleep." Mrs. Adams looked and replied, "No, he's not asleep." Unknown to most of the boys, Mr. Farley was carried into the chaplain's office by several men of the adult staff. Emergency steps were taken to revive him, and an ambulance took him to Amarillo's Northwest Texas Hospital. Death was caused by cerebral hemorrhage. Before going into the chapel, Mr. Farley had talked to two brothers who had told him about their 80-year-old grandfather who was critically ill. On his notepad, Mr. Farley had written, "Carl and Alan's grandfather. His last thought was for two of his boys." The time was 10:59, Sunday morning, February 19th. Around the world, newspapers, radio, and television stations carried the news. Ranch graduates serving in various branches of the armed services were shocked to learn that Mr. Farley had died. An announcement of Mr. Farley's death came in the dining hall before dinner. Most of the food was untouched. That evening, two of the boys went out into the night and looked up at the sky. The full moon was shining, surrounded by a silver ring. "You see that ring?" explained one. "Those are angels joining hands to welcome Mr. Farley into heaven." No building in Amarillo was large enough to accommodate the number of people wanting to pay their last respects to Mr. Farley. The funeral service was held at the city's Tascosa High School, where an estimated 1,000 people crowded into the auditorium. A special section was reserved for the boys and staff of the ranch. The pallbearers were two junior staff boys, Newman Soapy Dollar and John Cochran, two of Mr. Farley's closest friends, Dory Funk, the former ranch superintendent, and Cecil Stuttering Sam Hunter, and two members of the Boys Ranch Board of Directors, Virgil Patterson, J. Harold Dunn. Three clergymen, Dr. Winfred Moore, Dr. James R. Carroll, and the Reverend H. Evans Moreland, eulogized Mr. Farley. Concealed behind the stage curtains was the 100-voice Tascosa High School choir. So why do I share that? As I said in the first service, what is the last thing you said to someone? What is the last thing I said to someone this morning? Don't respond if it was not good. We all have impact in our words. Every time. You never know when it's the last thing that person's going to hear or the last thing you're going to say. What's the memory going to be? I'm not trying to be a downer. What I'm saying is we need to choose our words carefully. We need to choose things carefully, because this man, I can tell you for a fact, his words, his actions have lasted for generations. I know people that for the last 55 years have tried to model their lives after him. They've trained their children after him. They've tried to train their grandchildren because of him. What you do today on this earth is going to affect people for 50 to 60 to 100 years. It's not scary. It's just, who are we? I want them to know that they're worth loving. I want them to know that they're worth everything. I want them to know that they're worth loving. That's who we should be. Doesn't mean we're not going to have problems. Just know that what you say means something. When you say it, means something. It meant something. You think those two boys weren't touched that he cared about their grandfather? Yeah, they were touched. You think that boy that was the last one to hear his voice wasn't touched because of a pat on the shoulder? Absolutely. I know that for a fact. What are you going to say? What are you going to do? What are you going to leave behind?